My stepson sold my military medals. He told me he was just cleaning out the attic. I believed him until I found the auction listing. And one of them, a single piece of silver and ribbon, had a starting bid of $250,000. I'm a retired colonel with 22 years of service. Those medals weren't just decorations. They were my father's legacy from Korea and my own from Desert Storm. They were my story, locked in a case. And with one decision, my stepson didn't just sell metal. He sold the proof of a lifetime of service. What he never stopped to ask was what they were actually worth. My name is James Macready. I served from 1972 to 1994. After my wife Elaine passed 5 years ago, I moved into a smaller place near my old base. My stepson, Kyle, he's 30. He offered to help me move to store some of the bulkier things I couldn't fit. He said he had space in his attic. I was grateful. It felt like a bridge, you know. After Elaine was gone, things between us had got quiet, distant. This felt like him reaching back. The metal case was one of the things I asked him to store. It was a heavy oak box with a velvet interior, lined in faded blue. My father's medals were on the left. He was a corpsman with the 1st Marine Division at the Chasen Reservoir. Got a bronze star with a V for valor there, for running through gunfire to pull 2 wounded men to safety. His Purple Heart was next to it. The medal was cold to the touch always. My medals were on the right. My Distinguished Flying Cross from a hairy extraction in the Gulf. My Air Medal. My own Purple Heart, a piece of shrapnel from a mortar round outside Kuwait City. That one I got on my 41st birthday. They weren't just objects, they were chapters. You look at that case and you see 2 lives, 2 wars 50 years apart. You see the cost. I would open it sometimes, not often, maybe on Memorial Day or the anniversary of my father's passing. I'd just look. I never wore them. That didn't feel right. But keeping them together, preserving that story, that felt like a duty. Kyle is Elaine's son from her first marriage. I came into his life when he was 9. I never adopted him, but I raised him as my own, taught him to throw a spiral to change the oil in his car. We were close once, but he was always more his mother's son. Sensitive, artistic. He became a graphic designer. We loved each other, but we never really understood each other's languages. Mine was order, duty, history. His was the new thing, the next thing. He saw the past as weight. About a year after the move, I started getting this itch. I wanted to see the case. I was talking to a historian from the VFW who was writing a piece on Gulf War aircrews, and he asked if I had photographs of my medals. I told him I did better than photos. I called Kyle. He sounded rushed. I said, "Next time you're over, could you bring that oak box from the attic, the one with the medals?" There was a pause on the line, just a beat too long. "Yeah, sure, Dad. It's buried under a bunch of stuff, but I'll dig it out soon." Soon turned into 2 weeks. Then a month. I'd ask gently each time we spoke. His answers got vaguer. "It's on my list. I've been swamped with work." Then one Sunday dinner at his house, I asked again. He was carving a roast. He didn't look up. "Oh, that old thing. Honestly, Dad, it was just collecting dust. Some of that stuff was looking pretty tarnished. I figured it wasn't doing any good boxed up in the dark." A cold wire threaded through my chest. "What do you mean, Kyle?" He set down the carving fork. "I had a guy come by. He buys old military stuff. Coins, patches. He made a fair offer for the lot. I used it to pay down some credit card debt. I knew you, understand. It's not like you ever looked at them." The room got very quiet. I could hear the clock ticking in his kitchen. I understood every word individually, but together they made no sense. Sold. The lot. A fair offer. I put my napkin on the table. "You sold my father's medals." "Our stuff, Dad. It was just stuff, sitting in my attic. The guy said it was better for it to be with a collector who'd appreciate it. He said it so reasonably, as if he'd done me a favor, as if he'd cleared a clogged drain." I stood up. My knees felt unreliable. Who was the guy, Kyle? "Just a dealer. He had a website, international something. It was a few months ago. The money really helped." Months ago. He'd done this months ago and said nothing. I asked to see the receipt, the correspondence. He got defensive. He said he didn't keep that stuff. He said I was overreacting, that they were my memories, not my retirement fund. That was the phrase he used. They're your memories, not your retirement fund. As if that justified taking them and converting them into cash for his credit card bill. I left without saying another word. I drove home in a silence so loud it rang in my ears. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table and I tried to make the math work in my head. What is a fair offer for 2 lives of service? What number do you put on a piece of metal your father bled for? I couldn't find an equation that made it balance. The next morning, I started digging. I called every military antique dealer within 100 miles. I described the metals. Most weren't interested. One guy perked up when I mentioned the Chasen Reservoir Bronze Star. "Oh yeah," he said. "Korea stuff is hot, especially with good provenance. A named Bronze Star to a Chasen Corpsman. That's a 5-figure piece easy if it's with the group." I thanked him and hung up. 5 figures. Not 250,000, but not nothing. Kyle's fair offer was likely a fraction of that. I was operating on grief and anger, a bad fuel mixture. Then on the 3rd day, I remembered the name, International something. It took me 2 hours of searching online to find it. International Auctioneers. They had a reviews page, and there in a thread from 6 months back was a user comment. Sold a group of USAF and USN medals to these guys at their pop-up in the mall. Fast cash, but feel like I got lowballed. Saw similar groups online for twice what they paid. My hands were cold. I navigated to the recent sales page on the auction house's own website. It was a gallery of history packaged for sale. Revolutionary War muskets, World War II uniforms, and then I saw it. In a gallery titled Fine Militaria and Medals, October Auction. It was my father's medal group. His Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Good Conduct Medal, Korean Service Medal. They were laid out on a field of black velvet, professionally lit. The listing title read, Outstanding Group 2, a U.S. Navy Corpsman, 1 SD Marine Division, CHOSIN Reservoir, Bronze Star and Purple Heart. The estimate below it made the breath stop in my throat. Estimate $180,000 to $220,000. I scrolled down, further down the page. There was my medal group. Group 2, a U.S. Air Force Colonel, Distinguished Flying Cross, Desert Storm. Estimate $60,000 to $80,000. The lot had been broken up. Our story split in 2 to maximize profit. The combined estimate for the lot Kyle sold for a credit card payment was $250,000. I clicked on the listing for my father's medals. The auction was closed. Sold. The hammer price was listed in bold, red text. $250,000. The screen blurred. The number just sat there. $250,000. For the proof of my father's courage, his pain, his survival, bought and paid for by a stranger. And my stepson, the boy I raised, had traded it for pennies on the dollar. He hadn't just sold my past. He'd given away a fortune he never knew was there. I picked up the phone to call him. My hand was shaking, but I didn't dial. A different, colder thought cut through the shock. This wasn't just carelessness. This was a transaction. He'd signed a contract. He'd taken payment. And in doing so, he might have broken a law far more serious than just betraying my trust. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of cold, focused fury. I wasn't a grieving father anymore. I was a colonel assessing a breach. The first thing I needed to know was what law, if any, he had actually broken. The answer was more complicated than I wanted. Most people have heard of the Stolen Valor Act. It's illegal to wear medals you didn't earn, but selling them, that's a different legal landscape. I learned that for a handful of the highest awards, the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, it is actually a federal crime to buy or sell them. But a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, legally, they are considered the veteran's personal property. Once inherited, they become the heir's personal property. What Kyle did was a profound betrayal, but in the eyes of criminal law, it was likely just a shady sale of inherited goods. The law protected the symbol from being worn by a fraud, but not from being sold by a fool. This was a civil matter. a matter of property, and that meant my path was through a lawyer, not the police. I called an old friend, a JAG officer I'd served with named Michael Ruiz, who was now in private practice. I laid it out for him plain. My stepson, acting as a bailee, someone entrusted with my property, had converted it for his own gain without my knowledge or consent. I had the auction listing as proof of its true value, which was orders of magnitude higher than whatever he'd been paid. Mike listened quietly. When I finished, he said, "James, you've got a strong case for conversion, possibly fraud, but there's a clock ticking. That auction house now has a buyer. That buyer, if they're a legitimate collector, may have what's called good title. They bought it in good faith from what appeared to be a legitimate seller. Every day that passes makes it harder to claw that property back. Your first move isn't against Kyle, it's against the auction house. You have to stop the transfer. You have to assert your ownership now." He was right. The $250,000 hammer price wasn't just a number. It was a point of no return. Once that money cleared and the metals were shipped, my father's legacy would be gone forever into some private collection, likely never to be seen in public again. I had to move fast. I called international auctioneers. It took 3 transfers to get to a title and provenance manager, a woman named Vanessa. I identified myself as Colonel James Macready, retired U.S. Air Force. I told her the metal group listed as Lot 307, the Chasen Reservoir Group, had been sold without my authorization, that I was the legal owner and the son of the service member. I demanded the sale be frozen immediately. There was a long, static-filled silence. Then, a careful, professional voice. "Colonel Macready, I'm sorry to hear you're distressed. However, we stand by our due diligence." The seller provided a notarized affidavit stating he was the legal heir and rightful owner of the property. We have a copy of the death certificate for the veteran, James Macready Sr., and the seller's identification. The transaction was conducted in full compliance with our policies. My blood went cold. Kyle had provided a notarized affidavit. He'd used my father's death certificate. He had planned this. He hadn't just stumbled into a quick sale. He had constructed a paper trail to make it look legitimate. The betrayal deepened, turning from impulsive greed into something premeditated and cunning. "The seller is my stepson," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "He was storing the metals for me. They were never his to sell. Your due diligence didn't extend to contacting the living veteran's son, me, to verify his story. I am initiating legal action to recover my property. I am formally notifying you that the title is in dispute. If you complete that sale, you become party to the conversion." Her tone shifted, from professionally sympathetic to legally guarded. "We will, of course, take your claim under advisement and consult with our counsel. I will need you to submit any evidence of your ownership, photographs, prior appraisals, your own affidavit, to our legal department. Please be advised, the buyer has already remitted payment. The terms of our contract with the seller require us to disperse funds within 7 business days of the sale unless a legitimate title dispute is filed. You have until Friday." It was Tuesday. She gave me the email for their legal department. I hung up and sat back. The battlefield had just been defined. It was no longer just me and Kyle. It was me against Kyle and a multi-million-dollar auction house with lawyers on retainer who had every financial incentive to complete this $250,000 sale. Their policy was their shield. They had followed their policy. Kyle had given them the right papers. My word against theirs wasn't going to stop a thing. Mike Ruiz agreed to take the case. Our first step was to get a temporary restraining order to freeze the disbursement of funds from the auction house to Kyle, and to prevent the physical transfer of the metals to the buyer. To do that, we needed to file in court, and we needed to demonstrate irreparable harm. "The harm is easy," Mike said. "Once those metals are scattered into the collector's market, they're gone forever. The unique emotional and historical value is irreplaceable. The legal harm is that Kyle, once he gets that money, could spend it, move it, disappear it. You'd never recover a dime." We drafted the filing. I sat at my computer and wrote my affidavit. I described each metal. I included the only photograph I had of the open case, taken years ago at a family picnic, with Elaine smiling in the background. I printed out the auction listing with the $250,000 price. I documented every call and email with Kyle where I'd asked for the box back. I wrote down the date of that Sunday dinner when he told me. I was building my own paper fortress, just as I had been trained to do. The next morning, we filed the motion in county court. The hearing for the temporary order was set for Thursday afternoon, a 48-hour sprint. Mike served Kyle with the papers at his design office. He called me within minutes. His voice wasn't angry. It was shrill with panic. "Dad, what is this? A lawsuit? You're suing me." "You sold my property, Kyle. Property worth $250,000. You committed fraud to do it. This is the consequence." "It wasn't fraud. They were just sitting there. You gave them to me. I asked you to store them. There is a world of legal difference and you're about to learn it in a courtroom." I kept my voice flat. I couldn't afford emotion. Emotion would crack the foundation I was building. "You're choosing a box of old medals over your own family, over me." The hurt in his voice was genuine, and for a second it almost worked. It almost made me the villain. That was his play, not to argue the law but to argue the heart. "You made that choice when you forged a notarized document and sold them behind my back," I said. "You don't get to call it family now. You have a lawyer. Tell him to be in court on Thursday." I ended the call. The hearing was in a small, wood-paneled chamber. Kyle was there with a young attorney who looked like he'd just stepped out of a catalog. I sat beside Mike Ruiz in his Navy suit. The judge was an older man with a tired face. Mike presented our case concisely. Bailment, conversion, fraud, the staggering disparity between the true value and what Kyle was paid, the imminent and irreparable loss if the auction house paid out. Kyle's lawyer argued that this was a family misunderstanding, that I had effectively gifted the medals by leaving them in his care for so long, that his client was the step-grandson and stepson, a family member with a credible claim. He said freezing the funds would cause Kyle undue financial hardship, as he had already counted on that money to pay debts. The judge listened, tapping a pen. He looked at Kyle. "Mr. Ellis, did you sign a notarized affidavit stating you were the legal heir and owner of these medals?" Kyle swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor, but I believed I was. I was the one who had them." "But you are not the son of the veteran. You are not the biological son of the current owner. You are a stepson. Did you inform the notary of that exact relationship?" I said I was the grandson. It was simpler." The judge's pen stopped tapping. "You misrepresented your relationship to obtain a notarized document used in a commercial transaction for $250,000 of property. That is not simpler, counsel. That is the heart of the fraud allegation." He turned to Mike. "Temporary restraining order is granted. The respondent, Kyle Ellis, and any agents, including international auctioneers, are hereby enjoined from disbursing or transferring any funds from the sale of the disputed property, and from transferring the physical property itself, pending a full hearing. You have 14 days to file your full complaint." We had won the first skirmish. The money was frozen. The medals were in limbo, but as we walked out of the courtroom, Kyle brushed past me. His face was pale with a mixture of fear and rage. He didn't look like my stepson. He looked like a stranger who'd been cornered. He leaned in close, his voice a low hiss only I could hear. "You have no idea what you've started. That auction house doesn't just walk away from a sale. They're going to come for their money. And they're going to decide I'm the easier target to squeeze. You think you're protecting your treasure. You just lit a fuse." He walked away. Mike put a hand on my shoulder. "Standard bluster from a losing side," he said, "but I'd spent a career assessing threats. That wasn't bluster. That was a forecast. I had stopped the money from going to Kyle, but I had also trapped the auction house in the middle. They had a furious buyer who paid $250,000 for a medal they couldn't have, and they had a contract with Kyle promising him that money. Their only way out was to break one contract or the other. And multi-million-dollar corporations have very sharp lawyers whose job is to find the path of least financial resistance. 2 days later, the path became clear. I was served with new papers, but they weren't from Kyle. They were from international auctioneers. They were filing an interpleader action, the legal equivalent of throwing their hands up and saying, "We don't know who to pay, so a judge can decide." They were depositing the $250,000 with the court and walking away from the fight. On the surface, it looked like a win. The metals would be recalled from the buyer. The money was safe. But the cover letter from their attorney contained a single, devastating sentence. "Please be advised that our client will be pursuing Mr. Kyle Ellis for breach of warranty of title, fraudulent misrepresentation, and liquidated damages as per our seller's agreement, which includes full indemnification for all legal costs and damages incurred." They weren't fighting me for the metals. They were abandoning Kyle to the wolves. And their seller's agreement, the one Kyle signed without reading, almost certainly had a clause saying he promised he owned the items free and clear and would be on the hook for all costs if that wasn't true. He was about to be sued for $250,000 plus legal fees by a company with bottomless resources. His bluster in the hallway had been a prediction. They were coming for him. And when they got him, he would have one place left to turn to pay that judgment. Me. Kyle's prediction was right, but the speed of it shocked even me. The interpleader action was a formality. The real lawsuit landed on his doorstep a week later. It was for $287,000. The $250,000 for the sale, plus $37,000 in legal fees, administrative costs, and liquidated damages for breaching their seller agreement. He was drowning. His young lawyer called Mike Ruiz, hopping for a truce, a family solution. Mike relayed the message. "He's panicking, James. He says he can't afford his own defense on this. International Auctioneers' legal team is from a big firm in the city. They'll grind him into dust just on procedural motions. He's asking if you'll reconsider. Drop your suit against him so he can focus on fighting them." The audacity was breathtaking. He wanted me to stand down so he could fight the monster he'd unleashed, with the hope that if he somehow won, he'd keep the money he stole from me. The geometry of his selfishness was perfect. "No," I told Mike. "My suit stands. He doesn't get to use my mercy as a shield. He created this situation. He can face all of it." But a cold part of me, the strategist, saw the danger. If international auctioneers won a judgment against Kyle, they would garnish his wages, put liens on anything he owned. He was a graphic designer, not a banker. He would never be able to pay a $300,000 judgment. And when he defaulted, they would look for other avenues. They might try to come after the metals themselves again, arguing that since they'd paid for them, they had a claim. Or they might just destroy him financially out of spite. And then what? A broke, desperate, and deeply resentful stepson who blames me for his ruin is not a problem that goes away. It festers. The pressure didn't just come from the law, it came through the family. Elaine's sister, my sister-in-law Margaret, called. Her voice was tight with disapproval. "James, this has gone far enough. You're going to destroy that boy over some old metals. Elaine would be heartbroken. Just drop it. Let him pay you back what he got for them and be done with it." "He got maybe $10,000, Margaret. They're worth $250,000. That's not being done. That's being robbed." "Things, James, they're just things. You're choosing things over your own family. You're going to die alone in that house with your precious stuff, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself." She hung up. The echo of Kyle's words was uncanny. They had all decided on the narrative. I was the materialistic old man clinging to objects, blind to the living, breathing family in front of me. My father's courage, my service, our collective history, all reduced to stuff. It was a brilliant, infuriating feint. They reframed theft as a family squabble, and my defense of my property as an attack on the family itself. I refused to play my part. I didn't argue, I didn't justify, I simply repeated the facts. He stole, he lied, he sold. The value is $250,000. This is now a legal matter. End of discussion. My silence became a wall they couldn't climb. Meanwhile, the interpleader court required a resolution. The $250,000 sat in a court account. The metals were recalled from the disappointed buyer and were now held in a secure storage facility as evidence. The judge wanted the underlying ownership dispute settled. Our case against Kyle was moving toward a summary judgment hearing. It was a legal slam dunk. He had no defense. He admitted to selling property he knew was mine. The only question was damages. Mike laid out the options. We can push for a judgment for the full $250,000, the conversion value. The court will likely grant it. We can also push for punitive damages because of the fraud. But here's the reality, James. Getting a judgment is one thing, collecting is another. You can't get blood from a stone. If we win and International Auctioneers also wins, Kyle will have two massive judgments against him. He'll declare bankruptcy. In bankruptcy, unsecured creditors, that's us and the auction house, get pennies on the dollar if that. You'll never see the money, and you'll probably never see the metals either, as they'll be tied up in the bankruptcy estate for years. He let that sink in, the Pyrrhic victory. I could win in court and lose everything in practice. The metals could end up in legal limbo forever or sold off by a bankruptcy trustee to pay a fraction of the debts. The thought made me sick. This wasn't about the money. It was about the metals. It was about restoring what was taken. There's another path, Mike said carefully. Settlement. We use the leverage of our sure-win case to force a global settlement. We get Kyle to sign over any claim to the metals back to you, unconditionally. We get him to assign any claim he has to the court-held money over to you. In return, we agree not to enforce a financial judgment against him. We might even agree to help shield him somewhat from the auction house. Maybe we settle with them for a portion of their claimed fees, using a small part of the court-held funds to get them to go away. You get the metals. You get most of the money. He gets out from under the crushing debt, but he gets no profit. He walks away with nothing but his freedom from the lawsuits. It was the rational solution, the strategic retreat. It recovered the assets. It punished Kyle by denying him any gain, but it felt like a compromise. It felt like mercy for a man who had shown none. I wanted him to feel the full weight of what he'd done. But the colonel in me knew that in a bad tactical position, you take the objective you can secure. The primary objective was the metals. The secondary objective was the value. Punishing Kyle was tertiary, and pursuing it risked the first two. I told Mike to open negotiations. The mediation was set for a Tuesday in a bland conference room. Kyle arrived with a new lawyer, an older, weary-looking man named Costello. The auction house sent a junior associate. The mediator was a retired judge. Kyle looked awful, pale, thinner, the confidence completely drained from him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His lawyer did most of the talking. They were desperate. They agreed in principle to the structure. The metals back to me, the money to me. But the auction house's lawyer was the obstacle. They wanted their $37,000 in fees and costs. They didn't care where it came from, but they wanted it. Kyle had nothing. The only pot of money was the $250,000 in the court registry. The junior associate was immovable. Our client has incurred real expenses. We have a binding contract with Mr. Ellis for indemnification. We will not walk away empty-handed. If we cannot recover from him, we will oppose any release of the funds from the registry until our claim is satisfied. It was a stalemate. We circled for an hour. Then Kyle's lawyer, Costello, asked for a private caucus with just me and Mike. In the small side room, the old lawyer took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Colonel Macready," he said, "my client is not a bad person. He's a foolish, desperate one. He's about to lose his home. His marriage is hanging by a thread. He sees now the magnitude of what he did. He is profoundly sorry." He paused, letting the apology, which I didn't believe for a second, hang in the air. "There is a piece of information he has withheld. He is willing to share it now as a sign of good faith if it can help resolve the impasse with the auction house." I looked at Kyle. He was studying the grain of the conference table. "What information?" I asked. Kyle spoke without looking up. "The guy from International Auctioneers, the one who came to the house. He lowballed me, yes, but he also said something. He said, a group like this with this provenance, we typically offer more, but there's a market nuance." Kyle finally looked at me, his eyes hollow. He said one of the metals was problematic, that it might be legally ambiguous, that it could attract unwanted scrutiny from certain collectors or even veterans groups. He said that uncertainty depressed the offer. He implied it was almost a favor he was taking it off my hands. My mind raced. Which metal? My father's bronze star was documented, verifiable. His Purple Heart was standard. What was problematic? Then it hit me. My Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation was for a classified extraction. The details were never made public. The coordinates, the unit we pulled out, all of it was still redacted. To a legitimate historian or a meticulous collector, that lack of public paperwork could raise questions about authenticity. Not to me, I had the signed citation in a file at home, but to a stranger it might look odd. Was that it? Or was it something else? The auction house associate had framed it as a negative, a reason to pay less. But what if it was the opposite? What if that ambiguity was what made it incredibly rare and valuable to a specific, shadowy segment of the market? A metal from a classified mission, a story that couldn't be fully told. That was the kind of thing that could be worth a fortune to the wrong person. I looked at Mike. He gave a slight nod. This changed things. This wasn't just about a greedy stepson and a ruthless auction house. The auction house's own agent may have committed fraud on Kyle, knowingly misrepresenting the value to secure a steal. If we could prove that, their claim for indemnification looked a lot shakier. Their moral high ground evaporated. We went back into the main room. Mike addressed the auction house lawyer. We have reason to believe your agent may have engaged in fraudulent misrepresentation during the acquisition of this property, materially affecting the purchase price. If true, this would fundamentally alter the good faith nature of your contract and your claim for indemnity. We propose the following. The $250,000 is released to Colonel Macready. He, in turn, will pay you a settlement of $15,000 to cover your reasonable administrative costs, not your legal fees, on the condition you sign a full release of all claims against Mr. Ellis and the Colonel. You avoid a messy, public fraud allegation. You get something. We get closure. The junior associate's mask of bored confidence slipped. He stammered, asked for a recess to call his boss. 20 minutes later, he returned. They agreed. $15,000. The deal was struck. Kyle signed the papers assigning all rights to the metals and the money to me. He looked broken. As we gathered our things, he approached me. "Dad," he whispered, "I am so sorry." I looked at him. I saw the 9-year-old boy I taught to fish. I saw the stranger who sold my history. They were the same person. "I know you are," I said, "but sorry doesn't bring it back. Sorry is the starting point, not the finish line. You have to build a new life now, one that doesn't include taking what isn't yours." I walked out. I didn't look back. A week later, the court order was signed. The money was wired to my account, minus the $15,000 settlement. A week after that, a secure courier delivered a small, heavy package to my door. Inside, nestled in fresh velvet within a new lockable case, were the medals. My father's, mine. They were home. I opened the case on my kitchen table. The light caught the stars and the crosses. The silence in the house was complete. I had won. I had recovered the irrecoverable. I had the money and the medals. The objective was secure. But as I looked at them, separated from their story by legal battles and greed, I felt a hollow victory. They were just metal and ribbon again. The sacred had been made transactional. The fight to get them back had, in a way, completed the theft Kyle started. He had sold their meaning, and I had just spent months proving their price. That's when the real question landed, heavy and unavoidable. Now that I had them back, what was I supposed to do with them? For 2 weeks, the case sat on my shelf. I didn't open it. The $235,000 sat in a new savings account. I didn't touch it. It all felt like evidence from a crime scene, not a victory. I had proven what they were worth in a courtroom, but I had lost the sense of what they were worth to me. The silence from Kyle was absolute. I heard through Margaret that he and his wife had sold their house to pay off the remaining debts the legal settlement hadn't covered. They moved into a small apartment. He kept his job, but just barely. The family narrative had hardened. I was the unforgiving rich veteran who cared more about relics than people. I let that story be. Arguing would only give it oxygen. My friend Howard, the one I had dinner with every week, finally asked me over a steak. "So, James, you won, you got the loot back. What's the plan? Buy a boat, take a trip around the world." I pushed my peas around the plate. I don't want a boat. The money feels contaminated. It's the price tag on my father's blood and my own service. Spending it on a cruise feels like a final desecration. Howard nodded. He served too, he understood. Then give it away, all of it or most of it, purge the contamination. It wasn't a bad idea, but it felt like running away. Like I was so disgusted by the transaction that I'd just throw the proceeds into a pit. That didn't feel right either. The money was real. It could do real good. The problem was finding a good that honored where it came from. That honored the two men whose stories were told in those ribbons. I started making calls, not to lawyers this time, but to museums, the Army Historical Foundation, the National Museum of the United States Air Force. I asked a simple question: if I were to donate a significant metal group, one with a substantial financial value, what would that look like? Would they want it? The answers were respectful but cautious. They had vast collections. They took donations, of course, but they couldn't offer tax deductions for the full auction value, only for the donor's original cost basis, which in my case was zero. They would preserve them, yes, but they might spend decades in archival storage unseen. One curator said gently, "Colonel, medals are most powerful when their story is told. In a vast museum, that story can get generalized. They become a data point in a larger display." He was right. I didn't want my father's Bronze Star to be a data point. I wanted it to be a lesson. I wanted his run across that frozen battlefield to mean something to someone who wasn't me. That's when I thought about the high school. Not just any high school. My old high school here in town. They had a small, neglected display case in the main hallway with a dusty old flag and some photos of alumni who had served. I drove over one afternoon and just looked at it. It was sad. It was an afterthought. I met with the principal, a woman named Dr. Amina Vance. I told her I was an alumnus and a veteran. I asked if the school had any programs about modern history, about service. She was honest. "We have a chapter of the JROTC, but it's small. We cover the world wars in history class, but it's hard to make it feel immediate to the kids. It's all in books." I laid out my proposal. I would fund a permanent, endowed program, the Macready Legacy of Service program. It would have two parts. First, an annual scholarship for a graduating senior pursuing a career in public service, military, law enforcement, nursing, teaching. Second, a rotating, curated display in a new, proper case in the hallway. Not just my medals, but a platform to feature the stories of other veterans from the community. We'd bring in speakers. We'd link history class to the display. We'd make it living. I would fund it with $150,000 from the auction money. The remaining $85,000 I would keep, not for a boat, for my own security. For the first time, I saw the money not as contaminated, but as transformed. It was no longer the price of what was stolen. It was the fuel for what could be built. Dr. Vance was stunned, then thrilled. We shook hands. I called Mike Ruiz to draw up the paperwork for a dedicated fund. But there was still the problem of the physical medals. If they were the centerpiece of this display, even a rotating one, they would be behind glass in a public school. The thought made my stomach clench. What if they were stolen again? What if some kid vandalized the case? I just fought a war to get them back. Putting them at risk felt insane. I needed an expert. I called the curator from the Air Force Museum back. I asked him about high-quality replicas. He gave me a name, a specialist firm that works with museums to create display duplicates that are visually identical to the originals, but made of different materials and marked as replicas on the back. The originals could be kept in a bank vault, their provenance and value secured forever. The replicas could tell the story without risk. It was the solution. The originals would be preserved. Their story would be told. The value would be put to work. It was a triage of purpose. Security for the objects, education for their meaning, utility for their financial windfall. The week the scholarship fund paperwork was finalized, my doorbell rang. It was a Tuesday evening. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole. It was Kyle. He stood on the porch, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched against a light rain. He looked older. I opened the door. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice quiet. I stepped back. He came into the foyer, wiping his feet. He didn't go further. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said quickly. "I know I have no right to. I'm here to see you, to say I've been doing a lot of thinking, in therapy actually." I nodded, waiting. "I didn't just sell your medals," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I sold my connection to you, to Grandpa Macready. I told myself they were just things because I was jealous of them. I was jealous of the hold they had on you, of the stories that didn't include me. I was Elaine's kid. I was the afterthought. The medals were the real family. So when I had them in my attic, I thought, what if I turned them into something that is mine? Money, freedom. It was stupid. It was cruel. I see that now." He was crying now, silent tears cutting through the rain on his face. "I am so sorry, Dad. Not because I got sued. Because I broke something between us that I don't know how to fix." The anger I had held onto, the cold fury that had fueled me for months, didn't melt. It just shifted. It became a heavier, sadder weight. He was right. He had broken something. The trust wasn't just broken, it was pulverized. But the boy standing in front of me, shattered by his own actions, was still the boy I helped raise. "I can't just forgive this, Kyle," I said, my own voice thick. "Not today, maybe not ever in the way you want. What you did, it wasn't a mistake. It was a series of calculated choices. You have to live with that. So do I." He nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve. "I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just stating the fact of my regret. And I wanted you to know I'm working on why I did it, so I don't do something like it again to anyone." I believed him. That was the surprising thing. I believed his regret was real. It didn't undo the act, but it changed the future. "I'm putting the medals in the high school," I told him. "In a new program, a scholarship. They'll use replicas to tell the story. Your mother's name will be on the program too. The Elaine and James Macready Legacy of Service program." He looked up shocked. You're giving them away." "I'm putting them to work. The money too. The money you got for them is funding it." He absorbed this. The ultimate rejection of his transaction, converting his ill-gotten cash back into the very legacy he tried to monetize. The symmetry was absolute. He opened his mouth, closed it, then just said, That's good. Mom would have liked that." "I think so too," I said. We stood in silence for another minute. Then he turned to go. At the door, he stopped. "Would it be okay if I came to see the display when it's done? I'd like to see the story. Maybe finally understand it." "Yes," I said, "you can come." He left. I closed the door and leaned against it. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clear. The path ahead was visible, even if it was steep. The dedication ceremony for the display case was last month. The replica medals are stunning. You have to be an expert to tell they aren't real. Beneath them is a plaque with my father's name, his dates, a summary of his actions at Chasen. Next to it, a plaque with my name and a line about service in the Gulf. The first scholarship recipient is a young woman named Chloe who wants to be an emergency room doctor. She spoke at the ceremony. She talked about what service means when you're not wearing a uniform. Kyle was there. He stood at the back. He didn't approach me. He just looked at the display for a long time, then left. I saw him wipe his eyes as he went out the door. The original medals are in a safe deposit box. The paperwork is with my will. Upon my death, They and the remaining funds in the endowment will transfer irrevocably to the school district to perpetuate the program. They will never be owned by an individual again. They will be a permanent, protected story. People ask me if I'm at peace with it all. I tell them peace is the wrong word. Peace implies the conflict is forgotten. It's not forgotten. It's metabolized. It's part of the story now. The theft, the court battle, the betrayal, they're all footnotes in the longer biography of these objects. A biography that now includes a future doctor named Chloe and hopefully many others. I learned that value isn't a number in an auction catalog. It's a vector. It has magnitude and direction. Kyle saw only magnitude. He cashed it in for a direction that led nowhere. I had to redirect it toward memory, toward education, toward a future that remembers its past. The foundation of a life, like the foundation of a bridge, isn't just what it's made of, it's what it's asked to hold. For a long time, I asked those metals to hold only my grief and my pride. That was too small a job for them. They were built to hold more. They were built to hold a legacy. Now, finally, they do. So what is something worth? We spend our lives collecting proof of our existence, awards, photos, houses, relationships. We assume their value is fixed, written in the memory we attach to them. But value is a conversation. It's a negotiation between memory and market, between sentiment and price. My stepson heard one side of that conversation, the cold clink of a cash offer. He listened. I was forced to learn the other side, the brittle language of law, the hard numbers of an auction catalog, the profound cost of reclaiming what was mine. In the middle was $250,000, a number that meant nothing and everything at the same time. This isn't just a story about metals or money. It's a story about translation. How do you translate sacrifice into a number? How do you translate betrayal into a consequence? How do you translate grief into a future? There's no clean exchange rate. You have to create your own. I created mine by redirecting the energy of that theft. I turned the financial value into a scholarship. I turned the physical objects into a story for students. I turned a broken relationship into a distant, quiet acknowledgement of a shared loss. None of it is perfect. The trust is still gone. The metals are behind glass, both literally and figuratively, but they are no longer just mine. They belong to an idea now. An idea of service that extends beyond a uniform, into a classroom, into an emergency room. That's the final lesson, I think. We believe protecting what we love means holding it tightly, keeping it close, locking it away. Sometimes, protecting what you love means letting it become something bigger than your own grasp. It means weathering the storm of someone else's greed or indifference, not to win a fight, but to secure a legacy. The foundation holds not because it never shakes, but because after the shaking stops, you check for cracks, you pour new cement, and you decide what you're going to build on top of it next. If you have a story, an object, a piece of your history that you're protecting, or one that you've lost, I hope this gives you a frame to look at it. Not just for what it is, but for what it could mean. The most valuable things in our lives are often the ones we haven't found the right currency for yet. Thank you for listening. This is James Macready. If stories like this one about the hidden battles behind the things we cherish matter to you, consider subscribing. There are more layers to every surface and more stories to tell.